Yesterday marked the 35th yahrzeit of my paternal grandfather, Abraham Saul. His father, my great-grandfather, was killed in the First World War fighting for Poland when my grandfather was a baby. A letter scribbled in Yiddish hangs on a wall in my brother's home, verifying his death in a bunker on the battlefield. The letter served as the death certificate to eventually permit my great-grandmother to remarry. My grandfather and his mother left Poland when he was 7 and made their way to America. She remarried and had 3 more children. He grew up and lived what some would say was the American dream. Nothing fancy, but a good life. A loving marriage, a stable job, 2 successful sons, 1 beloved daughter-in-law. He actually had another bunch of daughter-in-laws, but they never stuck around with my uncle. And my brother and I, who were his only grandchildren. As a little girl, I remember his retirement party at the World Trade Center, a small window in his life beyond our family. In the years that followed, he devoted himself to writing short stories and poems, which were his passion, hours of learning at the Senior Center in Queens, and traveling with Elder Hostel, and of course, time with us, his family. As a grandfather, he was gentle and quiet, a balance to his more boisterous, less subtle wife, my grandmother. He didn't need a lot, but was very generous. He was a history buff, and beyond his interests of the mind, you could always feel his love. He never spoke of the journey on the boat to America, what it meant to integrate into a new culture, a new language, and even into a new family. And I never asked. I was 17 when he died, and just like we conclude a book of the Torah today with Parashat Pekudei and open a new book, so too I thought the book of his life was closed to me. It would remain as I knew him, and I would carry the regret for the questions that I didn't ask. This past summer, I traveled to Israel on a Manhattan interfaith clergy trip. We visited Yad Vashem, a place I have been to many, many times. However, it was the first time I went to the recently opened book room called the Book of Names. Has anyone been there? Just a handful. It really just had opened a couple of weeks before we arrived. It's a simple room with an enormous book hanging in its center. It contains all the known names of those that perished in the Shoah and where they lived and their age. Aside from a distant relative on my mother's side, most of our family had already arrived in America by the time of World War II. So I didn't have any specific names to look for. But as I sat in the presence of this book in the silence of the room, all of a sudden, it occurred to me that perhaps I should check if there were any Sauls in the book. Sauls from the unknown history of my grandfather. So I carefully made my way through the S's. And to my amazement, there was a list of about 15 Sauls from Poland. I texted my brother right away to check if the town that was mentioned was near my grandfather's town, and sure enough, it was. Our little family of Sauls, and we're very little, was all of a sudden much bigger and carried history that I had yet to learn. His book, literally a book, had been opened again. As the book of Shemot closes, it ends with the following pasuk. Ki anan Adonai al mishkan yomam ve'esh tieh laila bo le'enei kol beit Yisrael b'chol ma'asehem. For over the tabernacle a cloud of glory rested by day, and fire would appear in it by night, in the view of all the house of Israel throughout their journeys. It's a powerful end to this incredible book in the Torah, the book of the Exodus, of standing at Sinai, the golden calf, and the building of the Mishkan. The book seems to close with a sense of completeness. Chazak, chazak, v'nit chazek. But there is a subtlety in the last pasuk that Rashi takes note of. Rashi comments on the word maasehem, the journeys, their journeys. He writes, the place where they encamped is also called Masa. Literally, the meaning of Masa is journey, so that the place that they lodged or the place that they slept or stayed was also called a journey. Which seems odd, because we don't think of staying as a journey. At any moment, of course, the divine call could come to the Israelites, and then they were expected to be on the move. So the stopping moment was also filled with a lot of anticipation of when they would have to be on the move again. And so for thousands of years, impermanence and uncertainty have been at the center of our journeying. Though the ongoing journey in the wilderness is expressed physically, of course, the tradition is invested in elevating the idea of the spiritual journey. The very beginning of our story as a Jewish people is the command to Abraham, Lech Lecha, go forth, or walk forth. And the Svat Emet teaches that like Abraham, human beings are meant to be mehalech, walkers, going from one rung to the next towards a new attainment. Standing still is a recipe for stagnancy and wilting. Conversely, Yaakov is criticized in Parashat Vayeshev for his desire to settle, settling in the negative sense. Journeying is at the center of our spiritual DNA. I've been thinking a lot about my grandfather and his journey, the excitement, the fear, and the new life that came to be because he and my grandmother got on that boat. I am also thinking about the Sauls listed in the Book of Names at Yad Vashem, and what would have been had my grandfather and his mother not taken that journey, and all the members of our family and the world that might have been, that were destroyed in horrifying ways. This dual nature of journeying is at the core of who we are. On the one hand, the spiritual desire to search and attain, to travel to new heights. And on the other hand, the eternal sense of exile and danger, never feeling quite at home. Journeying as seeking, journeying as fleeing, or seeking refuge. We are living at a time of heightened uncertainty. And I know I am not alone in the feeling that the plate tectonic shifts are happening under my feet and in my soul. It is destabilizing, to say the least. And it's not only because of what happened on October 7th and the ensuing war in Israel and Gaza, but because of the hatred and the anti-Semitism that has been unleashed in our own country. And of course, the fear about the upcoming election. Not long ago, there was an op-ed in the New York Times entitled, "How to Thrive in an Uncertain World." Anyone read it? Remember it? It's a handful. By Maggie Jackson. The premise is that human beings are averse to uncertainty because we want answers. Given all that is happening in the world, it's easy to feel overwhelming angst for the future and see certainty as a beacon in a darkening time. But Jackson, based on significant research, writes, tolerating and even delighting in uncertainty doesn't merely help us to accept life's unpredictability, it also readies us to learn and adapt. I think the Slonemer actually carries this idea really powerfully when he writes about actually not the journeying of the Mishkan, but the dismantling and rebuilding of the Mishkan, which was part of the journeying. When they would stop, they would have to dismantle, and when they were on the go again, they would have to rebuild it. So he hones in on this moment of the dismantling of the Mishkan. And he says the tabernacle itself was erected from the angel of regret, for the regret of the golden calf, right? According to the tradition, I mean, there are different tellings of the story, but the Mishkan is a tikkun for the building of the golden calf. And then he says, we put so much energy into building our own tabernacle, our own inner tabernacle. It's actually, a person is called a mikdash ma'at, a small sanctuary. So we build all this effort into building ourselves up and building our own holy space so that the Shekhinah might dwell in us. But then after all this effort, we make a mistake and the whole thing comes apart. It's like everything we've done to build ourselves up just shatters in an instant when we feel we've made a mistake, or I think also when things like October 7th happen, or other things in our life, more personal, more global. It's like everything falls apart. When that happens, he says, our job is to turn around, take heart, and set out to rebuild our spiritual home. Even if it comes apart again, we must build it once again. Whenever we fall and our spiritual world collapses around us, which is like the dismantling of the tabernacle, we must raise it up anew. This is reflected in the verse. He says, I will build an altar for my broken heart. It's a very powerful image to think that the dismantling of the Mishkan is a model for what it means to live with mistake and disappointment and error and things falling apart. But by saying that dismantling of the Mishkan is representative of that, it means it's at the essence of who we are. It's not an aberration, it's a certainty that that will come to be, which is what we don't like. We don't like the uncertainty, but he says it's an inevitability of traveling, of journeying, and therefore it is an integration of uncertainty and dismantling in the course of our journeying. We are all living with broken hearts. And as Jews, in moments of fear and uncertainty like we're living today, we identify with the history of the journeys we took to flee persecution. Look at the Atlantic, right? How many stories that have been talking about the story that keeps on repeating itself. We're telling the same story over and over again, and I'm not saying that it's not true. That is one aspect of who we are as a Jewish people, that we've had to flee, that people have never fully accepted us. I think there's obviously gradations of that in where we live. Dara Horn and Frank Foyer and lots of people have things to say about that. That's one story of our journey. And simultaneously, our tradition, I think, has to find a shared sense of journeying, a companion to that story of journeying, which honors and celebrates the power to harness all our creativity and resilience, even in the brokenness, for the sake of possibility. For thousands of years, our people's faith looked toward building again and toward a promised land that had yet to be realized, even as things were broken, even as things were uncertain. And I think that's the question in many ways of this time. Many people don't want to ask questions. We're in the midst of this very terrifying moment, and with a lot of uncertainty, and certainly in Israel, people say we don't know what will be. But in many ways, that rupture is the opportunity to say, what should be? What is Zionism? What are the Jewish people put on the earth for? What does it mean to live in dignity with another nation? We shouldn't be suppressing these questions. That is at the essence of a dismantling moment, is to ask, how are we going to build anew, not how we can go back to what was, because you can't rewind. I will never know what that 7-year-old boy who became my grandfather felt as he got on that boat and left behind the world that he knew. But I know this: he took a journey to a land unknown and unseen. He built a life, a humble one, loving and beautiful one, and he taught his sons and his grandchildren. He wasn't much of a crier, but he still did cry. Everyone except my brother, actually, and my grandmother were criers. He taught his sons and his grandchildren that journeys help us build dreams. And thank God he crossed that ocean. Shabbat Shalom.